Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Plaw, at Andrew Plaw Tech. And in today's episode, we're catching up with a friend. We haven't talked to her in a couple years, but we are welcoming back Jess Pomfret to the podcast. She is a SQL DBA consultant. She's a contributor to DBA Tools, huge time community member, always going to conferences, LinkedIn Learning, an all-around great person. Offered a lot of great advice that I've taken to heart. Jess, welcome back to the PowerShell podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
I have known you for several years now, but in prepping for this podcast, I learned a lot of new things about you, or I guess kind of reminded me of things I've forgotten. But you have quite the interesting background leading into IT.
Yeah, I never actually planned on being a tech worker. I was definitely going to be a professional footballer. So that didn't quite work out. And now I'm a SQL Server DBA PowerShell person. So
Still
pretty much the same, right? Yeah.
Still competing, just in, I guess, a different way. And I guess It feels less competitive and more collaborative, I feel, a lot of times in tech.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of the kind of things you learn playing team sports translate directly to being in a team environment at work too, right? Like common goals of wanting to complete the project or win the project, whatever. It translates and it's useful, but yeah.
No, it really is. My favorite thing about work is the fact that we are a team. Like I've been on teams where we primarily did tickets and there was just such an insane amount. It kind of sucked and was soul crushing. But what got me through it was the fact that I was on a team and we were in it together and we were struggling together. And if I could help out a coworker by working a little harder, it's a lot easier than just kind of going at it solo. So definitely appreciate that aspect of things. But let's talk about it. So where are you from? And then where'd you go to college and sort of what was that journey for you?
Yeah, so I'm actually from the south of England. I grew up in Chippenham, which is in Wiltshire. And in 2005, I actually got a soccer scholarship, proper football scholarship to go to America to do college. And like I said, I never planned on working in tech or doing any of that. I was just playing football. And when I got to the University of Akron, which is where I went to school, they were like, oh, you've got to choose a degree also. You can't just play football, which was a bummer. But I changed my major a couple times and ended up doing e-business and MIS, information systems, and just found that I fell in love with like technology and coding and problem solving, specifically database stuff. So once the 4 years were done, I kind of moved towards working in tech. And I actually got my first job kind of not accidentally. I obviously went to the interview, but it was for a DBA database administrator position doing SQL Server stuff. And I had taken like one class and I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but sure, I'll go to the interview. I needed a job to stay in America. Otherwise I'd have to leave and go back to the UK. And so they offered me that job, even though I felt like I was super underqualified, but it was a great place to learn on the job. They had literally everything you could think of SQL Server wise. And a great team to learn from. I remember my first day, I sat down with one of the guys that was going to train me, and he was like, oh, go ahead and start this SQL Server agent job. And I was like, I don't know what that is. He was like, oh, no. Like I couldn't do the most basic task that they needed to do. But I learned a lot there and obviously picked it up as we went. So yeah, I became a DBA and then started automating things with PowerShell and found kind of the love for automation and doing less work if you can automate it away, right? So that was kind of how I got into PowerShell.
Interesting. So first you kind of fell in love with kind of structured data and information systems. Now, was there anything else in your life that kind of hit a similar part of your brain and was enjoyable? I don't know, maybe puzzles or something prior to that kind of let you know that, oh, there is kind of a connection here? Or was it a fresh, new, like part of your brain that you're just discovering for the first time kind of thing?
No, I think I've always loved like problem solving, like puzzles for sure, like games that are very like puzzle driven, like video games that are puzzle driven. I always kind of lean towards those. And so it wasn't a surprise that a different kind of problem would be what I enjoy, right? Like, I think nowadays, as you said, I work as a consultant for SQL Server and automation, DevOps stuff, basically solving people's problems. They come in with a SQL Server problem or something they want to automate, and I get to figure out how to do it, basically, which is cool. Now my job is just problem solving and fixing things, which is cool.
What did you enjoy getting into more? Like getting into SQL and data and that stuff for the first time, or kind of embracing and implementing PowerShell combined with the SQL stuff?
I would probably say the combination of PowerShell and SQL Server. So when I first got into the community, I was involved in the Cleveland SQL Server user group, which is where I was based in Ohio. And there was some members of the community there that are huge speakers, like Aaron Stellato and Alan White, just to name two. And they were always trying to encourage me to speak, because I would just sit at the back of the room and go to every presentation, but not talk to anyone and not say anything. Like, I enjoyed learning, but I was never going to speak or be involved, right? And they kind of encouraged me to present, to the point where I gave my first presentation at that user group on SQL Server data compression. So like row level compression, page level compression, what it is, the internals, how it works. But then the last demo I did was on how we can use DBA tools and PowerShell to like automate some of that stuff, automate collecting the metrics that would help you make the decision on which compression to use, but also automate like actually applying the compression. And when I talked to Erin after that presentation, she was kind of my mentor during this process. She was like, yeah, the presentation was good. Obviously, you were nervous, but like you got excited when we got to the PowerShell bit. Like that was the bit that you could tell I was excited to talk about, and I was really into, you know? So from that moment, I kind of focused more towards PowerShell and automation around the SQL Server sphere. Like that's still probably my main focus even today. But just how we can automate things, how we can take away some of the things that you have to do manually that you don't really need to, right? Like if I can go and collect all of the failed jobs from all of the instances with one line of PowerShell, well, that just saved me a lot of time if I was going to have to connect to each one individually and check it out, right? So yeah, the automation piece is definitely kind of where my passion is.
Yeah, because it kind of takes the skills that you've already learned and stuff and takes it to the whole next degree and lets you apply it in a lot more places. So
yeah, totally.
It's interesting to hear, though, that similar thing that we see of like people lurking. You were lurking at a user group. Your head was in the right
100%.
space. Right? You're learning. You're at the right spot. And then all it took was just a little bit of encouragement and a little bit of guidance. And I guess a good community that allows that type of thing. Because there are probably some communities that would be kind of, you only need to be super experienced, but that's not SQL, that's not PowerShell.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of could take advantage of that.
Yeah, I feel so lucky that I've kind of fallen into like the SQL Server community and the PowerShell community, because you're right, they're both so welcoming. Like all of the open source stuff I've been involved in, DBA tools, DBA checks, other modules like that, any of the speaking I've done or blogging or anything I've ever done, people have been encouraging, right? They've been supportive, they've been helpful rather than being negative about it, which I think some tech communities have like a bad stereotype around, right? So it's so nice and refreshing that everyone here is trying to like lift other people up as they go and help. It's super cool.
Yeah, and it's been going on for, I don't want to say sort of like generations, like not generations of human life, but like people getting started. Then they get to the point where they're speaking, contributing, and they kind of do their own thing. Maybe they go into a different segment of IT, and then boom, there's that next generation that gets trained up by those people who are already trained. And it's such an enriching thing to be a part of. Yeah,
totally. And I feel like so honored that people took time out of their lives, careers, days to help me get to the point where I could speak at conferences or contribute to open source software, to the point where like I feel like now I'm at the point where I can help the next group, right? Like I try and be involved in helping new speakers or new contributors to DBA tools, because I know how much of a massive impact it had on my life, that if we can have even a little bit of that impact on the next group of people and then they feed it on, you know, like it kind of spreads, right? Like I can help 5 people, those 5 people can help 5 people each. Like we're going to be massive by the end.
Yep. And it's just like the PowerShell thing. Like we have these skills, but when you implement automation, you can apply them more places. When you teach other people, you can use your lessons for good. When you things like this, do public stuff, talk on a podcast, speak at a conference, you're able to really create this net that can help so many people. And it all started, I guess, from your journey, and I guess mine as well, all started from just someone empowering others. giving us the opportunity and kind of the framework to succeed in. And now all of a sudden we can pay it forward. And it almost feels, I don't know, full circle to be in that position now. I don't know what it's like for you to be helping others.
No, agreed. Totally. And I feel like it's almost more rewarding, right? Like it was super cool the first time I gave a presentation. Like my Garmin thought I was doing an activity because I was so nervous and so sweaty by the end of it. But now like I've done more and more presentations and I still get that kind of high from doing it. But if you help someone else give their first presentation, it's like a totally different feeling, right? It's super rewarding.
It's so much fun. And I love how it pairs with like a degree of professional success too, where it's like, yes, we were talking about all this stuff that sounds great. Oh, we're helping others in this thing. But there is a certain degree of professional success that comes from being in those positions where you've put in the work. There's always good stuff that comes out whenever you do such good work for a long time, but it's not selfless. Like, it does serve everyone. Totally. It serves a community and the individual.
For sure. I mean, the job I have now, I work for a company called Data Masterminds. And the only reason I work for them is because they knew who I was from the community and I knew who they were. And so when the time came that they had a position that I was a good fit for, they knew where to go, right? They knew who I was. They could come straight to me and talk to me about it. So yeah, I mean, the community and who you know is always so important for like the next job role that you need, or even like who to ask, right? That some problem comes across your desk where you're like, oh my, I don't know who to ask about this. But if you've been in the community and you've been talking to people, like, I'll go to this person for Kerberos. I'll go to this person for Active Directory stuff, So it's just building that community. It's going to pay off in the long term for sure.
Yeah. And it's way better to, like you're saying, have those people you can ask questions to. There's so much in IT. You need a Jess in your life. If you're not a SQL person, you need a friend like Jess who that's their sort of area of interest. Maybe they lean on you for other things. Maybe you're just friends generally. And it's the way to go about it for sure.
It's always those things that like, it seems like a stupid question for someone who isn't a SQL Server DBA, right? But if you're not, and you're just setting up an application and it uses SQL Server, like, I don't know what to do with backups or whatever, like asking that question and getting it right is so important. So yeah, find someone you can ask, come ask me for sure.
So you work for Data Masterminds, and I'm not a SQL person, but I know who they are. Like I know they have a lot of sort of the top talent and top community folks. It seems like. Did you ever think you'd be at a place like that? Like, did you know about them before you started working there? Was like, it feels like that might be a full circle type of moment where you're like, holy crap, now I'm like, this is my coworker right here. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, I knew who they were. And there's a few like groups like Data Masterminds, right? For sure. That is like, it feels weird for me to say this now that I work for them, but it feels like they're kind of the peak, right? Like they are in the community. There's a lot of MVPs. There's a lot of experts. They're solving interesting problems. So yeah, it is. When they approached me to want to hire me, basically, I was like, me? Like, you sure? You want me to do that? So it's like, but once you get in there and you meet, like my colleagues are some of the most like humble but intelligent people ever, right? They're there to help. We have a great team. I've learned tons since I've been there from people who do performance tuning way better than I do, or configuration of SQL Server way better than I do. Like it makes me a better person being in that kind of, or better technologist being in that kind of environment. So yeah, it is. I definitely knew who they were before I worked for them, and I was super shocked they came knocking on my door. But
yeah, is it the most, I guess, SQL related? It probably is the most talented group of SQL folks you've worked with. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so. The unique thing about this is like we're a group of consultants, whereas every company I worked for before, I was like a group of DBAs, and I worked with some really great DBAs in the past, which, to be fair, I learned a ton from them also. Some of them are just less in the community, less in the public eye, but still excellent SQL Server administrators. But yeah, the Slack channel that we have at work now is just full of people that can answer questions. Like anytime I've got a problem, I know someone in there is going to have seen it sometime or have read something or have ideas. So yeah, it's super cool. And the other cool thing is we're kind of branching out too from like our Data Masterminds, which is where it started. We now have analytics masterminds. So we have people that do like Fabric, data warehousing, all that stuff that I have no idea about. And we're also branching out into like the DevOps space. We've just started DevOps Masterminds. So like I'm involved in that more because I'm doing the PowerShell stuff, but like DevOps, automation, pipelines, Azure stuff, infrastructure as code, that's all falling under this like new company basically, but same company, different like sister company. So yeah, it's super exciting. And the people that get involved in that, again, great minds from that area, you know.
What is a non-technical thing you've learned since working at Data Masterminds?
Ooh,
It could
that's
be
a good question.
Yeah, it could be around communication, organization, how to use Slack better, anything. I guess even dealing with clients, if that's newer.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I would say is the ability to kind of context switch. So every job I had up until this point, I was working for one company. I had one environment, maybe a few domains of SQL servers or whatever, but everything was like, I knew this was the server team or this was the network team. Like I knew who the people were. I knew how to log in. I knew which VPN client, because it was all just one, right? And so when I first started working for Data Masterminds, which has been 3.5 years now, the first week it was like, okay, we're going to work with this client today, so connect with this VPN, like these are the people, it's in Azure, like okay, great. And then next day we're working on this client today, it's a different VPN, different people, it's in AWS, like and even within the same day, like we'll talk to potentially 4 or 5 different clients in a day who all I have to try and remember what their problems are, where their SQL servers are, who their people are. So to begin with, that was super overwhelming for me. And it's still super difficult, but I try and keep notes. I use, it's called LogSec. It's like a note-taking tool where you can use hashtags to like link stuff together. So like I'll do like a hashtag for the client name and then take notes under that. And then you can click on the hashtag and you can go to all the notes you've taken for that client. And I do it for different projects too, just so that I can be like, okay, I know I talked to someone about this, like go back through. And like when we onboard a new client, I'll use that to kind of keep track of like the main points, right? Like this is who I talked to about this. This is what their VPN client is. And we obviously have documentation as a team too for that stuff. But for me personally, like I find like when I'm writing stuff down or typing stuff down, it kind of sticks better. So yeah, that's the biggest non-technical thing I think I've had to learn and I'm still working on.
And I hear that and I'm thinking to myself, so it sounds like basically there's a lot of noise, a lot of things that aren't related to the core thing you're trying to solve that you have to kind of go through, and then you can work on the core stuff. And it sounds like every day that is changing, different project, different tools, all that stuff, different names of servers or whatever. Have you gotten better as you've seen this and you've seen these patterns time and time again to kind of like ignore the noise and be able to have your brain just see, okay, this is the core issue. These are the moving parts we need to actually deal with. Yeah, they have names and ways to connect, but like, have you gotten better at identifying sort of the core problem?
Yeah, I think so. But I think it's something I can still do better at, right? Like because of the number of clients and Slack channels and Teams channels I'm in, there's always notifications. And so I try hard, like if I'm working on a problem, that I try and put it on do not disturb or in focus mode on Windows, and kind of focus on what I'm doing for 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever, because otherwise the next ping that comes in, I'm like, oh, I'll go look at that, you know, oh, that looks interesting, let me see what's going on. So yeah, it is hard to deal with the noise. And I think too, in the age of like social media and phone notifications, I used to get all of the notifications on my phone to my watch, and I just was constantly like looking at my watch, right? And it just drove me insane because it wasn't stuff that I needed to handle immediately. Like it would be better if I batched that up a bit. So I actually disabled the majority of notifications to my watch. And even with my phone, like I have it set so that if I put it face down, it goes to do not disturb. And I'll quite often do that when I need to focus, just because there's so much noise from everywhere, right? Like social media or emails or Slack or whatever. So yeah, it is hard to focus in the noise sometimes.
Yes, it is. I agree with that. All right, let's talk about automation a little bit. So you mentioned that automation doesn't have to necessarily be the hugest automation in the world. It can be big or small to have significant impact. So what is a small improvement or a small automation that made a big difference, either for you, for a client, or that you've seen, something like that?
Yeah. So we had, I had a client maybe in the last 6 or 9 months that they had some process that they were doing manually, and they did it manually about once a week and basically called some API endpoints, but they were doing it manually through Postman because then they could see the results and then they could do the next step or whatever, right? So I actually worked with them to move that process into PowerShell, into an Azure automation account where it could run daily, which is quick. It was quicker if they did it daily rather than weekly. It was like this cleanup process. But you could also build logic around it, right? Like if something failed, we would log to their logging software. It could send an email if it needed to. But we ended up just using this logging software and then building alerts based off that. But the ability to take something that's like only maybe a 5-10 minute job for someone to do manually, but just to move that out of their day. Because what happens if they forget to do it for a couple of weeks, right? Well, now it's going to take longer because they haven't cleaned stuff up for 2 weeks, or if they're on holiday, or maybe they have more important things to do, right? I think automation, I think a lot of people see it, it's like, oh, it's got to be something big. It's got to save like $1 million or like 4 hours every day of someone's time. But it's all the like little things you can do to move little pieces of work into being automated. You just free up so much time because, like you said with the noise, the context switching, right? I find, oh, I've got to do that cleanup process. I stop what I'm doing. I do the cleanup process. I come back. I can't remember what I was doing. So now I've got to go back through the notes or the code or whatever and get kind of refocused. So like any little piece of work that you can move into an automated process and kind of just take off your plate, yeah, it really adds up in the end.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people who listen to this are still at the beginner side of things, and they'll hear all these kind of elaborate projects that people have done, the guests on the podcast or whatever. And I recently had a mentorship talk with somebody who was like, they're struggling to find use cases for PowerShell. And I gave them a pretty simple one. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap of thinking that you need to like reinvent Microsoft in order to have a contribution. When in reality, it's like something as simple as, like you're saying, one little process that you've now automated forever, you made it maintainable. And those types of small wins, I think, are more approachable for those beginners. Totally. Which can go a long way to build confidence and to earn trust with your manager.
Yeah, I think when I was first learning PowerShell, I looked for things I could do already in Management Studio or in Windows File Explorer, whatever, that I could then replicate in PowerShell, right? Because especially with like DBA tools, if I can do something in Management Studio, I was like, okay, I need to go see who owns this database. Okay, I go into Management Studio, I connect to the instance, I right click on the database, I can see that I own the database. Now, can I replicate that with PowerShell? Like, how would I do it in PowerShell? Because now you can compare the answer too, right? Like, make sure you got it correct. But yeah, I would say like people that are trying to find use cases for using PowerShell, like think of little tasks that you do. Like maybe your downloads folder, right? Like every time I download something from the web, it goes into the downloads folder. Do I ever clean that up? No, it's probably full of junk. Well, I could set some kind of retention period, right? Like I don't need things that I downloaded over a month ago, because if I needed it, maybe I put it somewhere useful. Well, you could write a PowerShell script and schedule that to run daily or weekly, right? Just to clean up your own downloads folder. So like going through the process of how you're going to do that, how you're going to add some error handling, how you're going to add some logging, you can build a whole little project around something as simple as that.
Yeah, I think learning PowerShell is one thing, and learning to think in terms of automation and opportunities to use PowerShell is a slightly different skill.
That's true.
It gets easier over time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think at this point, like if I have to do any task and there's a chance I'm going to have to do it again, like I'm probably going to lean towards PowerShell, but that's because I'm comfortable in it, right? Like if you're not comfortable in it, you're going to clean the downloads folder manually every month because it doesn't take that long. But yeah, you're right. It is kind of a mindset thing. Like how can I do this in PowerShell, and how can I like find things that I can do so that I do learn more?
Yep. And I think it's just like with the speaking thing or with doing anything with growth. If you are feeling like it's too big of a step, find a smaller step. Make a smaller project. It doesn't have to change your whole workflow. Find some use case and build up from there. It's okay to start small.
Yeah. And I think too, like find something that someone else has done and try and replicate it, right? A lot of people will say like, oh, I can't speak on stuff because everyone's already talking about things. Like someone already talked about indexes or database design or PowerShell automation with SQL Server. Yeah, but you're going to do it in a different way. Like you could give the same presentation based on the same abstract. It wouldn't be the same 60-minute presentation, right? Like you would get totally different content. You would present it in a different way that would relate to different people. So even if someone's already built DBA tools, but you want to look at SMO and you want to see how it interacts with databases, do it. See how it works.
Yep, you'll be better for it for sure.
Totally.
What is one of your favorite DBA tools commands or use cases?
Ooh, my favorite DBA tools command. There's like 700 commands at this point. It's hard to pick a favorite. Okay. One that I used recently that I love. So I do a lot of database migrations, and one of the commands I use a lot is repair DBA DB orphan user, which when you copy logins, if you don't copy the SID of the login, when you move the database to the new server, the server login and the database user SIDs don't match, and so they're orphaned, and you can't log in. And it's probably one of the most common things I see go wrong with a database migration if you haven't automated it with DBA tools, because you then try and connect your application to the new server, and in Management Studio, you can see the logins there, you can see the users there, but they can't talk to each other, so you get login failures. So that little command will go through all of the logins on your server and match up the SIDs. So you can get around that by using copy DBA login because it moves the SID too. But if you script it out or you manually recreate it, you need to go through this extra step. So I just had a migration project where we use that, and it is just so neat. It was not an easy thing to do in Management Studio. You needed T-SQL code, and it was T-SQL code I could never remember, but I can remember that DBA tools command. So that's my favorite this week.
I mean, that sounds like a pretty good command. I love that any command that can save someone a ton of time. It's just an easy win, right? Can you, gosh, I didn't even introduce DBA tools. Can you give me a brief, like what the heck is DBA tools for those who are hearing about it? I know they probably imagine it's something with DBA and SQL, but what is this module?
Yeah, it's exactly that. So it was kind of born out of a project that Chrissy Lemaire had like 10 years ago now at this point, to migrate some SharePoint databases from one instance to another. And when you do that, there are databases, there are logins, there are link servers, there are credentials. So she wrote this whole process that when she was talking to other people about, were like, oh, that would be really useful for me too. You should make a module, which is where DBA tools came from. And I like to describe it as kind of a command line management studio. Like anything you can do in SQL Server Management Studio, you can pretty much do in DBA tools too. But you get the benefits of using PowerShell, like the ability to handle multiples. So in Management Studio, I can easily see the properties of one database. But with DBA tools, I can easily see the properties of all the databases on an instance, or all the databases on all my instances. And you can bring all that data together and filter it, like all the things you're used to in PowerShell. It's super amazing. Like I literally use DBA tools every day when I'm dealing with SQL Server. I default to it now if it's on a server over Management Studio quite often, just because it's just easy. I know the commands and they have a common naming convention, so they're relatively easy to kind of learn and pick up. But just the get commands for getting information, it's now in a script. I can copy it out. It's formatted nicely. It's not like a bunch of screenshots. Yeah, it's a fantastic module. If you do anything SQL Server related and you haven't heard of DBA tools, I would highly recommend playing around with it.
Please, 1,000,000%. You can't highly recommend that enough.
No.
You're not alone in being as passionate about this project too. It has a very vibrant community, a lot of contributors, a lot of people using it to great effect all over the world. I mean, this thing is the real deal. 100% check it out. And thank Jess later for the recommendation.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. We're looking for more easy wins. DBA tools, easy win. Get that, look it up. There's tons of content. What about something that's in PowerShell? Maybe we have some commands we're using. Maybe we want to add some filtering. I don't know. What is an underutilized PowerShell command or tip that people could be using, but they're not?
Okay, one of my favorites, and it is really simple, is outgrid view with the pass-through switch. So you can basically take some output of a command and then push it through outgrid view with the pass-through switch, and it will pop up the window that we're used to. You can select one or multiple rows from that result set and press OK, and it passes it on in the pipeline. So either to another command, or you can save it to a variable. So one example, I used this recently. I was restoring some SQL Server backups. So obviously using DBA Tools, you can get the log chain of backups. So in SQL Server, you have point-in-time recovery, right? And to get to a certain point in time, I need the full backup, maybe a differential backup, and then every log backup that's occurred since that last full or diff, to be able to apply all of the pieces to get to the point in time. Well, DBA Tools will get you that list. There's another amazing command called get DBA DB backup history, something like that. And it will get you that full log chain, which was really time consuming to make manually. Like, the folks that worked on those commands are scientists, basically. Like, it's complicated stuff. But I needed to restore that to another server while there was still log backups happening on the primary. And because it was a big database, by the time I'd done the full backup, a differential, and some of the log backups, I still had like 20 more log backups to apply. So without grid view, I could get that backup chain and then just select the ones I needed and pass them on to continue the restore without having to you could do it with a where statement, right? You could do where object date bigger than this, like trying to work out exactly how to get them. But outgrid view with pass through is just such a quick way of grabbing them in kind of a hybrid fashion, right? Like, I'm using scripts, but it is a bit hands-on. Like, I can just do that manually and move on.
So helpful. Because like you're saying, yeah, you could write a very fancy way to filter it that you might only actually use once for that specific use case. Whereas like to make the tool actually reusable, if you include that output where it's just like, use your brain for a couple seconds, you know exactly what you're looking for, pick the two and move on. It's nice. So outgrid view dash pass through, check it out.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the one I hear from people. They're like, hey, I heard about it on the podcast. It was so cool. I'm like, yeah, I know. That's why we said it. It's one of those easy wins. It's built in.
It's almost those things you don't think about because it is like, it's been around forever. It's simple, but it just adds a little ease to your tasks.
For sure. And we're all about making it easier.
Exactly.
Let's talk about what you've been up to though, because I have not been able to keep track of you this year. You've been all over the place. We got LinkedIn Learning popping off. We got you traveling to conferences and speaking left and right. What's been going on the past year for you?
Yeah, it's been busy, but it's been great. Like, I love being involved in both the SQL Server and the PowerShell community. So yeah, I try and travel to a few conferences. I was at PSConf EU last year, and I'm lucky enough to be there again this year in June. And I've been to a few SQL conferences. I was at PASS Summit last year, which is one of the big ones in the data community. When I was just starting off, that was like the kind of the big one to get to, right? So I was really proud to be there and speaking there. But I was at SQL conference in Germany just a couple of weeks ago. Another really fun community event. But yeah, the LinkedIn Learning is something I've just started doing in the last maybe 2 or 3 years. I've got a few courses out there. I've got a DBA Tools course out there, which is one of my favorite, but it's probably one of the ones that gets watched the least just because it's more niche. But I do love that course as a way for people to get into DBA Tools. But the LinkedIn Learning operation is way bigger than I ever realized until I got involved with it. The number of courses they have out there is mind-blowing on everything from technology to like business to everything, like critical thinking, like all kinds. But they actually have like film studios in California where they'll fly instructors out to record stuff live. And that was like the most amazing experience because I'm just a nerd talking about SQL Server stuff, right? Or PowerShell stuff. And now suddenly I feel like a TV star because I'm getting my hair and makeup done and I'm on some weird set talking about PowerShell. It's just, it's wild. But it's been such a fun experience. Like, I absolutely love talking about SQL Server, PowerShell for the community, like at conferences, online, on podcast, whatever. So it was just really fun that there's such an infrastructure around making like such a professional product. Product.
Yeah. And it's so cool that you've had such a great reach with it as well. I saw the behind the scenes photo. I was like, oh my gosh, Jess, let's go.
Where I'm doing this. Yeah. I have a massive joke with my friends that like whenever someone takes a picture of me, like I don't know what to do with my hands and they're just like in the way. So I had them take a picture of that. I'm looking all professional. There's all these cameras and I'm still me.
That's right. And I think that's what resonates though, is you got to just be yourself. There's news anchors if you want. Welcome to 371 with a no. We don't need that. We need real people. So that's awesome. Exactly. All right. I got to see, where's your head at? Because you've reached what some people would never think was like an approachable level of success. Not an actual movie star, but still like, for a normal person, what you're doing is extraordinary. And you are that person who's lived this experience. Are you like comfortable with it? Like you are comfortable with the fact that anyone who puts in the work that you've put in, or is it very much, you're in the shoes of like, what the freak is going on? Why am I going?
Yeah, totally. I am 100% like an introvert. Like I love talking to people, but it does drain me. And I think we talked about like conferences. Like I love being at conferences, but I'm not going to be the last one at the party. I'm going to be back in my hotel room, like in a dark room. But like it's one of those things that I absolutely love being in the community, and I still find it weird. Like Rob Sewell, who I do a lot of presentations with, he said something to me one day. It's like, oh, we're like famous in this community. Like people are going to ask us for pictures. And I was like, no one's going to ask us for a picture. And then we did this pre-con at PASS and like multiple people were like, oh, can we get a selfie? And I was like, with us? Like, we're just talking about PowerShell. So it is so weird. And I mean, I love it because it means like what I'm doing is important to people, right? Like I'm able to share stuff with people and they care about it. But it is super weird as like a very introverted nerd.
Well, I think, kind of coming full circle, you have felt how great it can be when you go through that journey and you are playing that role for other people. So it makes sense why they would kind of cherish the experience in that way, because you've given a lot to them. It's not, for me, I spend some time wrapping my head around this. Like, yeah, it's technical stuff, but it's not just that the value you're providing to people, right? When you're able to empower them to get new skills, to change their career, to have a better work life, automate things, that is improving their quality of life. And no, you're not directly doing it, but you are empowering them to take control of that. And that is such a huge thing that goes way beyond the zeros and the ones for me.
Yeah, totally. I think too, like if people see that I can do this, right? Like I can put out a LinkedIn Learning course, I can speak at PASS or PSConf, like these big conferences. Like I hope that there are people in the audience who are like, yeah, maybe I can do that too, and I will be there to help them do that. Like if they reach out to me or whatever, and I can do anything to help, I'll be the first person to try and help them do that, because it's just it's a weird world, but it's fun,
Yep. And I completely agree with that. Like, whenever I encourage other people or even think about my public contributions, I am more than okay with the imperfections, because nobody wants a perfect product. But if there are those imperfections, say you're a first-time speaker and you kind of flub something here or there, what you do is you actually instill confidence in other people to a certain degree, where they're like, oh, that person wasn't the most polished person I've ever seen. They had a couple issues and they made it through. So I can as well. And if you can embrace that and live in that space, it's really great, but it's kind of hard to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things I try and help, like anyone who is newer to speaking, like I feel like a lot of people have the same fear that someone is going to ask a question from the audience that they're not going to know the answer to. And that was one of my biggest fears too. And still is. Like, I don't want to get to the point where I'm like, panic. But I think there's something real in the fact that you can say, I don't know, like there's no expectation that the speaker is going to know absolutely everything about a topic, even a smaller topic. And to be able to kind of say, I don't know, but I'll get back to you on it, or I'll write a blog and we'll figure it out. There's no need to try and make something up on the spot or know the answer. You just have to kind of like take on that you can't know everything. You've done your best. You've prepared as much as you can for this presentation. If you don't know, just say that. And I think I think as an audience member too, if someone says, I don't know, it is kind of refreshing, right? Like they're like us. We don't know everything. They don't know everything. We're all humans. So yeah.
Yep. I like that a lot. Yeah, it's good. We're all different. And I think if anyone's authentically themselves, it resonates to a certain degree. Not saying everybody is the exact cutout to do X, Y, or Z, but there is a place for everybody in this community for sure. And the more people can put themselves out there and see what works for them and try new things and grow, everyone gets better for it. So thank you for being a great example we can point to as a great success story.
No, I appreciate that. I will keep on trying to bring other people along on the journey. So,
all right, I need some more advice before we wrap up here. I got a bunch of travel coming up, going to PowerShell Summit pretty soon. You travel a lot. I traveled a lot last year. I need more tips on it. So what conference travel or just work travel tips do you have?
I think my biggest work travel tip is probably to like be conscious of what you need personally from like a mental health standpoint, from like a physical standpoint, as far as getting through a conference, right? Like it's always going to be overwhelming, whether you're speaking or attending or just hanging out for 3 to 5 days. I always try and make sure that I have enough time, like I said, in my hotel room, in a dark room by myself to kind of recharge. So I'm there for the next day. I like to work out. And so quite often I'll just take some time out of the day to go and do that and make sure I'm still doing the things that kind of keep me going when I'm at home too, right? Like not just being exhausted, being around people for 18 hours in a day or something. But like I said too, like I'm never going to be the last person at the party on whatever night it is because I want to be in bed. So I think just looking after yourself, being kind of mindful of what you need, and then doing it. Like there's nothing wrong with taking some time by yourself, doing something chill. Like something me and Rob will do quite often at conferences is we'll get breakfast and then we'll go for kind of a walk before the day starts, just like some time to get outside, get some fresh air, kind of regroup before networking, learning, presenting, whatever's coming up that day.
That's really good advice. I'm not like you. I'm not the first one to leave. I'm usually, if there's a group of people, I have a hard time. I mean, in some ways, I like to keep things a little tame, but I love the people. It does exhaust me in a certain right. But like, I think that whenever I was newer to conference travel, it's like if you get to go to conference, that's like a once a year thing if you're lucky. So, I never get to see these friends. So I'm thinking like, oh, I need to get every hour that I can. So like you're saying, 18-hour days. But if we can think longer term, which is how I kind of encourage other people to think, it's not the last conference I'll ever go to. Probably if you're traveling more, maybe not even in the same year, but there's always opportunities. And if it's going to throw off your personal life and your personal well-being, well, that's going to take away from future engagements. And yeah, so I've kind of learned my lesson the hard way last year about making sure to work out and sleep at nighttime on conferences, get at least 7-8 hours would be great.
Yeah, it's definitely that balance, right? Like, and I'm the same. Like, I haven't seen these people in ages. I want to see them. I want to do this. I want to go there. I want to go to as many sessions as I can. I want to talk to as many people. But yeah, if you do that on day one and you can't do day two at all because you're so burnt out already, right? Like, it's not worth it. You got to find that balance, and it is so hard. Like, I think it takes some time of being on the conference circuit and going and knowing what to do and how to even see the signs, right? That, okay, I need to leave and sit by myself for a while.
I agree with you there. And whenever I think of community, I like to think about how we can make it a very welcoming experience for people of all different backgrounds. And one background is people who don't drink. I see a lot of conferences that I go to and just out there in the world. I think they have a pretty big drinking culture. And that might be tied to the fact that it's the one kind of week a year that most people get out and they're really looking to like let all this stress from the awful job. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But what advice do you have for people approaching conferences if they don't drink? Are they still welcome to conferences? Is there a path for them, or is it they're just going to have no fun?
No, I think there's still plenty of fun to be had. So I haven't drank in about, I think, 7 years at this point, maybe 8 years. And I've never felt within the PowerShell community or the data community that's like, go home, you can't have fun. You're not partaking in the drinking or whatever. I think there obviously is always parties, there's always bars and stuff. But I think the the kind of community is very inclusive on all aspects, and that isn't something that is any different. I think a lot of places too are trying to be more inclusive for like people who don't want to drink alcohol, like having better non-alcoholic options at parties or events or whatever.
Mocktails, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think no, it's definitely not a barrier. Like if you don't drink, you can still enjoy a conference. You can still hang out with your friends. I think everyone that I hang out with at conferences knows I don't drink, and it's not like a big thing, you know. So
yeah, that's great advice. Because I haven't heard anyone who is kind of like put off from that, but a lot of times people don't say anything, so it's always worth addressing it. And
totally.
if you're out there, have a good time. And you know what? I bet you'll be a little bit more recovered the next day to learn, because that can be the challenge, just like how long the days are at conferences where your brain is just.
Yeah.
What's your next conference? Where are you headed to?
I think PSConf is probably my next speaking conference. That's in June, I believe. I think that'll be my next appearance. Yeah. I'm heading to the MVP Summit, or I will have got back from that once this podcast goes live, I think, which will be my first time attending that, which I'm super excited for, especially because I'm not speaking or anything, right? I'm just going to hang out with friends and be on the attendee side, which is super cool. So yeah.
Nice.
PSConf will be my next presentation.
That should be fun. I only have one talk at Summit, so I'm hoping to have a really just geek out on PowerShell, you know?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to talk about a project that you started doing a while ago. Can you tell me a little bit about finding data friends?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So it's actually a podcast that me and one of my friends, Ben, started to basically get to know the data community. So they are 15-minute video episodes on YouTube. You can find them on Finding Data Friends YouTube channel. And we basically ask like what someone's favorite data thing is, their favorite non-data thing, and then their favorite food. And it's just like a quick way of meeting people in the community, because there are so many people that have been around for a while that we know faces, but we don't know a lot about them. And then there's a ton of people who are newer and coming into the community. So we really try and find like a good mix of faces that we know and faces that we don't know, so that we can kind of create a bigger data community. But yeah, it's been really fun. I've enjoyed it a lot. We're about to release our 100th episode, which is wild, because this just started as like an idea a couple of years ago. So
we talked beforehand. Sorry. Links in the show notes for all this, by the way.
Perfect.
And gotta love when you can bring a community together. First of all, that's huge.
Yeah.
And it kind of brings life to it, because we all see these online names, but when you can actually connect it with a story or a little bit of information about the person, it really goes a long way to sort of humanize these online interactions we can have. So that is amazing. If you're in the data community, check it out.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like this podcast too, right? Like people come on and I know some of the people who've been on here, or I know their names. I don't know a lot about the person. Maybe I've seen one project, they've done one presentation. So yeah, it's really nice just to listen to a bit more about people.
For sure. And before we started interviewing, you mentioned that one of your takeaways you wanted people to go away with is to stay curious. How do you stay curious? And what advice do you have for others who want to do the same?
So the easiest way that I find to learn is by playing around with something, like poking at something to see how it works. And I think that staying curious is just kind of tied right in with that, right? Like if there's a script or a process or something that I want to understand more, like I'll try and play with it, see how it works, see how it doesn't work, and just kind of stay curious around that. Always asking questions around why something is doing something in a certain way, because you'll quite often find that it doesn't need to do it in that specific way. But yeah, staying curious is just my best way of learning and growing.
I like that. And it kind of pairs nicely with advice from, I guess, Cody Paternostro from a couple of weeks ago. And that was, don't move on from something until you understand what confused you initially. Don't just kind of look and move on. Try and actually absorb it when possible. Obviously, you can't understand everything in IT that you get curious about, but it's okay to stay in that curious spot.
I actually listened to his podcast not too long ago, on his episode on the show, and he was talking about a presentation he gave on the same day. I think he had some build errors. There was some like live troubleshooting going on, and it is exactly right that you've got to figure it out. You've got to be curious about why something's broken or what's gone on, and then you can learn more from it.
People have connected. They've loved the episode. They said, "Oh my gosh, where has Jess been all my life?" And they want to stay in touch with you. Where can they find you on the World Wide Web?
The best place is probably either LinkedIn or Blue Sky. I'm more on LinkedIn at the moment than Blue Sky, but I do have profiles on both. So yeah, connect with me, send me a request, whatever. That would be great.
And links will be in the show note. Check out the LinkedIn learning course. Check out the podcast. And you know what, Jess, there's some people listening and they might be walking before a conference. They might be walking, listening to us right now. They might be going to work. I just want to tell them, do it safely, take care of yourself. And, leave us a like, comment, subscribe, Apple Podcasts, 5-star review, all that happy stuff. You mentioned it earlier. We got PowerShell Wednesdays every single Wednesday this year. We're having a meetup. Join the community. Come on out. It's on discord.gg/PDQ, 2 p.m. Eastern. Always new stuff. I think we're going to lean into some 101 content at least once a month going forward. Absolute beginner stuff. If you're listening to this and you're super new to PowerShell, wondering how to actually run commands and connect things together, come on by. We got a spot for you. I don't know. Is there anything else I'm supposed to say? I don't know. Jess, thank you so much for joining me. It was great catching up with you. And I hope we get to cross paths in person at a conference here soon.
Yeah, totally. Thanks so much for having me back. I've loved it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jess.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.